Alright, so this is the modern list I played last night. I went 3-1. We were 3-0 and we played in the finals. We decided not to split because I just don't like splitting, honestly. Sideboard felt really good. Every round I felt like I had the tools that I needed. Maybe at the end I could have brought in the meltdowns instead of the chalices, but if we go back, I could have done things more aggressively. But so yeah, the deck is basically the same as it's always been. We added the squee back to give it back the aggressive slant. Warren Instigator is back in the deck, making a comeback because Warren Instigator is pretty amazing into the control and very slow mid-range decks. If you're on the play and you have a Warren Instigator, you're going to be able to get an attack in usually before they can have their Bowmasters up. And that's a really big deal. So if you can just sneak some damage in with this Warren Instigator, you can throw a bunch of damage into play. Chain Whirler is a concession to Boros energy. It's just a tool we have to have now. Squee is something that I also want to try because we're adding Ignoble to the deck. This is a change that people have been telling me to try. So I wanted to try it out, and it felt pretty good last night. 1 Stomping Grounds, we shave a couple of fetches, and then we just play 3 Ignobles. This replaces the second Skirk, and we trim some of the Silver Bullet tutor targets. And last night we kind of were missing our 3rd Munitions Expert, but Sting Scourger does a very good Munitions Expert impression. Sting Scourger is 2 mana unsummon on a 2/2, but you have to pay 4 at the upkeep or you sack it. MVP of last night was definitely Trashmaster. Trashmaster won me almost every single match that I played. No exaggeration. Round 1 versus Titan, I had my Trashmaster in my opening hand, and it allowed me to shatter my opponent's amulets. Because I had an Ignoble and I was on the play, I was able to ramp out a Trashmaster and then sack my fodder and hit the amulets. It didn't help that Val was missing land drops, but that was the line I had to play to, and I did. So Trashmaster was the MVP of last night. What was the worst card in this deck last night? Chain Whirler was pretty bad. I'll be honest. Squee did work. Squee allowed me to close a couple games really fast. But I feel like having Chain Whirler is very important. We have a Chain Whirler to mop up all the X1s if my opponent goes wide. We have a Sting Scourger to bounce the super tall thing if my opponent just reanimates one thing. We have the Munitions Expert to kill something if it's in the middle of those two things. And then we have this highly aggressive slant that allows us to just really, really go crazy after them. Sorry, getting a spam call. I'm just gonna block it. Boom. Okay. Yeah, so the main deck feels really, really good. We were between 3 and 4 arenas. We went back to 4. Yeah, we should basic to get the 4th arena and Stomping Grounds in the deck. So the main deck feels pretty solid. The sideboard is really what I kind of want to talk about. No, okay. So starting off, Chalice I think is in the best spot that it's ever been. Chalice and Leyline actually both are in amazing spots. So if you're playing a deck in Modern right now, it's most likely a graveyard deck in some form or fashion, whether it's a Faithless Looting deck, a Goryo's Vengeance deck, a Underworld Breach deck, a Dredge deck, any deck that's not strictly aggro or control is going to have some graveyard elements. Leyline of the Void is amazing because it just turns off all those things, but you know that, so we're going to go to the next card. Chalice, I think, is amazing because if you're not playing graveyard strategies in Modern, you're playing 0 mana acceleration because they just unbanned Mox Opal, so everybody's playing Mox Opal right now. So 3 Chalice, putting Chalice on 0 on the play is amazing. Also, sometimes I got Affinity by my Affinity player taking the play, and they had Ornithopter Opal in their hand and a tapped Indestructible land. But to play around Meltdown, they just pass. But I didn't have Meltdown in my hand. I had Chalice, so I went Chalice on 0, and they weren't able to cast their zeros anymore. The other cool thing about Chalice is it scales. So let's say you have a bunch of mana, right? You have the option to go Chalice on 0, Chalice on 1, Chalice on 2, Chalice on 3. If you're really, really mana flooded, you get Chalice on 3. And then you kind of just think, because you have Cavern and Vial, you can really name any number that you need. And whatever your opponent is bottled on, if you know that their deck plays a lot of 2s, you name 2. If you know that their deck is all 1-drops, you name 1. For the example of like Hammer is like all 1-drops. And so, or Death Shadow is an even better one. So you just name Chalice on 1, and you have a ley line against Shadow, and it feels really good. So these cards all kind of like slot together against different matchups. So Chalice, really good against the aggressive decks that are super 0 and 1 mana, 1-drop heavy. Dampening Sphere is amazing against the Storm decks, the big mana decks. All the Titan decks right now are playing Lotus Field, and Dampening Sphere is the best card against Lotus Field because they can't even really play it. They can play their Lotus Field to set up, but it doesn't feel good when you have a ley line in play and you play a Dampening Sphere, and then, or it doesn't feel good when your opponent has a ley line in play and a Dampening Sphere, and then you have to look at your Lotus Field and your 2 lands and figure out if you want to sack those 2 lands and put them in the exile, or you just want to like wait on your Lotus Field. And so I love Dampening Sphere. It's tech against Storm, it's tech against Titan, which are 2 of my hardest matchups. It's really good against like it's not really good against Eldrazi, but it's like okay against Eldrazi. It slows them down a little bit. Blood Moon is kind of hard on my mana. So I bring in Dampening Sphere as like my big mana hate, and it also like slows down a lot of decks. It's decent against Phoenix too, because it makes casting 3 1-mana spells costs 1, 3, 6. So they need 6 mana to cast 3 spells in 1 turn. So it slows down Phoenix a lot. Meltdown is pretty self-explanatory. If Chalice doesn't feel right, I bring in Meltdown. It's also a good catch-up mechanic. So sequencing-wise, you want to have your Meltdowns first. You want your opponent to throw a bunch of artifacts on the battlefield, and then you just Meltdown, hit all those artifacts. And then you play Chalice, and Chalice locks out the future artifacts. But you can't always control your draws. So sometimes I board in just the Chalices, and sometimes I board in just the Meltdowns. When I played Spike on stream when he was playing Core Tapper, I brought in the 3 Chalices and the 3 Meltdowns, and it just felt amazing because I had Chalice on 1, Chalice on 0, and Chalice on 1. And then I didn't even need the Meltdown because he just couldn't play the game. So that's an example of like what I'm talking about, where if you know what your opponent's game plan is, you can like cut off the essential avenues, and then you leave them with like the top end. But usually top end they're finishers, but they're usually finishers that synergize with your setup cards. So and then the last card's Rakdos Charm. So Rakdos Charm can hit the graveyard. So the 3 modes on Rakdos Charm are 2 mana instant, exile target graveyard, each creature deals 1 damage to their controller, and then destroy target artifact. So it shatters Mox. Shout out to my buddy Dom Striker for being the man and recommending Rakdos Charm. It's my flex slot. It was going to be Disruptor Flute. There's like a billion cards it could be, but Rakdos Charm hits Mox Opal and Belcher. It exiles a graveyard, which is just amazing, and then it can deal damage to my opponent if they go super wide and I need some burn, or if they just go infinite and the Splinter Twin or anything, then you just like insta kill them. So this is the sideboard I played last night. Went 3-1, and we're just gonna go over to the YouTube.